Hello and welcome back, and just before you start today's video I just want to get a quick disclaimer off the bat. You may be coming to this video to see whether the Aoostar R1 NAS is the right middle ground DIY NAS solution for your needs, and that is great. But I just wanted to add here at the beginning, I am not including benchmarks in today's video. We are going to be working on follow-up videos on this. We're going to be doing Plex Media server testing on this and installation guides on this device. But because it rocks out the gate with a Windows 11 mini PC-esque license for you to take advantage of Windows 11, I don't think anyone's really going to be utilising this with Windows 11. Most users are going to get this, bung on Proxmox and their own OSs, bung on Unraid, bung on TrueNAS. Ultimately, that means that me benchmarking this device within the Windows environment isn't going to be that useful to anyone. And because I'm going to be flashing it for other videos, I thought I would factor in those benchmarks for later. So rather than you guys having to wait for the hardware review of this, I thought I'd add this disclaimer just to let you know that benchmarks and further testing on this device is coming, but we're not including it in today's video. But that long benchmark related disclaimer aside, please, let's crack on with the video. Hello and welcome back, and that is right, today we want to talk about a bloody new NAS, but one with a difference, because let's face it, if you've been following this industry in the last 12 months or so, you've probably observed a fun little thing going on, and that is the development of this middle ground in the industry because of cost of living, because of the economic crisis. Didn't you hear about it? And there's a lot of users out there that would have once absolutely loved to have got in bed with the turnkey NAS solution provider out there, your Synology, your QNAP or whatever, and they've looked at the cost of them and gone, it's a bit much, in it. And then they've looked at the other side of the field. They've looked at the screwdriver junkies out there going full DIY with your Unraid, your TrueNAS, your Open Media Vault and whatever, and gone, it's a lot of time. Ooh, I don't know what I'm doing there. And somehow in the middle of all of that, this middle ground in 2023 between them has got bigger and bigger and bigger, from crowdfunded campaigns that we talked about on the channel to DIY sort of solutions coming out of AliExpress and third-party brands in China and more that have started expanding towards solutions that are either arriving completely OS-free but pre-built for NAS, or arriving with an OS and kind of a, well, you can use it or you cannot use it attitude to the game. And one of the many brands that have come out in 2023 into that field of NAS to occupy this middle ground is Aoostar, a brand that I'm not certain I'm going to pronounce right throughout the whole of this video, so I apologise in advance.
Aoostar, 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 Aoostar.
And this is the Aoostar
Aoostar
R1, a 2-bay NAS solution that is more like a mini PC than it is a NAS, but certainly ready to be NAS ready at any moment. Indeed, they stuck it on the box. Now, this 2-bay NAS solution in tower form, there's actually a couple of configurations available for it, and today we're looking at the Intel N100 version. This system here, arriving at that N100, either arrives with no internal OS drive and no memory. You can pick it up for about $209, or you can get the version that's got 16 gig of memory and a half terabyte SSD, so 512. That knocks around for $269. And finally, you can get a 32 gig memory model, and that is DDR4 3200 megahertz memory, and a terabyte SSD inside in this 2-bay NAS with the M100 for about $339, $350. Now, on the face of it, that's a decent bit of wallop, but it's not that much for a 2-bay NAS. When you start looking at Synology DS224 Plus knocking around for between $280 to $320, depending on where you're going around, and that's running on an old Celeron J4125, or you look at the other side of the field with QNAP, knocking out their 2-bay, which is using a much more recent release Celeron with 2.5G and more, but even that 2-bay still has to live around the $450 mark because of that extra memory inside. That's what I mean about the pricing structure right now. This is a solution that is coming out the gate really targeting the slightly more budget-friendly buyers, but budget-friendly buyers who don't want to get silicon paste under their fingertips. Now, I mentioned there were 2 configs. There is another version of this device that I'm not going to talk about too much in this video, but there's a review, if you look up on Craft Computing, it's the only one I could find actually, of the R7 2-bay, and that is one that's running on a lovely little AMD processor inside, which is technically making it the most powerful 2-bay I've ever seen in terms of pre-built NAS solutions. I recommend you check that out, or I'll link to it in the description. But for this one, I would say with that N100 CPU and that price tag knocking around, depending if you want the memory and OS drive included, from 209 to about 339, 349, that's pretty reasonable for a powerful 2-bay there. Now, what do you get for your money? Well, you get this pretty ugly box, if I'm honest. For those that aren't aware, Aoostar is predominantly a mini PC brand, and that has very much been the attitude on this device. This is effectively a mini PC that has NAS capabilities, but more on that later on. So inside of the R1, we have our first time instruction card, so not really a manual, just some information there, and I'm getting the drive media put inside there, and again information there on the back with regards to the warranty, and again hopefully that's on screen. We've got our accessories box, more on that in a moment. We've got a bit of plastic, we've got the unit, we've got another bit of plastic, and we've got the unit itself in a really nice cloth bag. I'm quite keen on that. You didn't come here for a full unboxing, but it's quite nice, that bag. But I will say, slightly underwhelming protection inside there. It's single layer cardboard as well, so not a huge amount of protection, but it did arrive in another outer box. I should add that as well. Now, in terms of the accessories that this system arrives with, get those out of there. What have we got? We've got that HDMI cable there, a little mini one there. This system is a visual output, again, because it's a mini PC, you're sort of going to need that. On top of that, we've got our external power brick, something I'm going to touch on a little bit more detail in a moment, and you've got additional rubber feet there for the base of the device and a mains lead. Now, one of the things that really bugged me about this very early doors, and when I've seen reviews on Amazon and stuff for this device, I will say they kind of missed the window, particularly in the N100 version. I might give them a slight pass on the AMD, but on this version, the fact that it's not rocking out the gate with USB power is a bit of a bummer. Now, the PSU it does arrive with is a standard external power brick there, single connector there, so nothing too snazzy, running on a Mickey Mouse, if you will, there on the back. But this is 90 watts. That's a lot, right? A 90 watt external power brick for this 2-bay. Yes, that N100 is it's an Alder Lake relatively modern CPU ever since Intel kind of phased out the Celeron and Pentium, but I'll still argue a 90 watt PSU, I'm not convinced this system needs that much. Now, maybe I'm wrong. When I look inside, this is 2 hard drives. It's got 2 M2 slots inside. But even with full capabilities and all of those USBs on the go and the visual output, this doesn't have 10G, it doesn't have scalability with a PCIe slot. That just seems like quite a hefty PSU. Now, of course, just because it's a 90 watt PSU doesn't mean it's going to use it. Of course it isn't. That's a total capability. It's not traditional use. And also that CPU has got some really good internal power management as well that you can configure. So, although, obviously, this doesn't mean you're going to be consuming more power, it just seemed quite overkill in terms of a PSU. But that's enough of the accessories. Let's talk about the design of this, because that is something I am very much behind on this. Now, in terms of design, I'll say right now, I kind of like this. It's a slightly different take from what we've seen before. It's a top-down loaded slotted hard drive system there. So again, not dissimilar to some of the more budget QNAP 2-bays that I've seen out there in that TS233 series that came before it. If I had to say what I think it looks like, other than the obvious Mac comparisons, I would say, I don't know how many of you remember Drobo when they were releasing their data transporter system that ran on 2.5-inch drives. This is incredibly similar to the aesthetic of that, and indeed the layout of the ports and connections is just slightly larger scale because it's taking advantage of 3.5-inch drives. The measurements of the device are 16.2 centimeters by 16.2 centimeters by 19.8 centimeters, so it's not exactly massive, and without drives it weighs about a kilo, maybe obviously a little bit more depending on the drives you use. Now, if we pop that down in the middle of the table, we can look at those 2 Synologies that I just spoke about there, the Synology NAS and the QNAP NAS that I was talking about earlier on. Now, that is how big those 2 bays are. Obviously, we're not going to compare them in terms of scale that way because of the deployment of the drives. When we get them inside like that, it does become a little clear that the scope of kind of physical scale here, it's actually just a fraction smaller in terms of overall volume than the competitors there on the market, which are of course turnkey solutions, which are fully hardware, software, one brand. More on that later on. But the fact that it's a vertical scale device there, and the cooling system that has got nothing on the sides but the ventilation there on the top via a removable panel that we'll go into more detail later on, and a baseline ventilation panel with a large 90mm fan there based on the base of it is actually quite petite in terms of its scale. When we do the software section of the video, I'll have this within a couple of feet of the recording microphone so we can get a good understanding of the noise level when it's in operation. The single power button, no LCD there built into the front of the device. As mentioned, plenty of ventilation there, no removable dust panels. These are all just standard plastic bits there on the front. If we remove that top panel, you can have a little look again. Full ventilation there. It's magnetized at each of the corners, going straight into the top there. And we've got further ventilation for the additional storage bays inside and ventilation for an additional heat sink that connects to an internal CPU fan that I'll show you later on. So the verticality of that ventilation there running through the system is going to be paramount, and having the drive sandwiched between them, it's actually a very unique method to have that MOBO based inside between the storage drives, because there is a concern, of course, that the drives, as they get very, very hot, are going to act as a kind of hot sandwich between the motherboard, but they have thought of that, something I'll show you later on, with the placement of the fan and that internal heatsink. Now, the drive bays that slot inside, there is an example of one of the empty trays. I'll be straight with you, these are not expensive trays. These are quite cheap trays overall. Again, very flimsy plastic all the way along. And in terms of drive installation, they use the rubber clips that you remove, stick to the each edges of your drive and pop inside. There is holes for 2.5-inch media, fine, but I won't call these particularly expensive trays. Now, given the OS that this rocks out the gate with, this arrives with Windows 11 on board. That's not Windows 11 Server Edition or Windows Server 2023-24 or some other made-up number. This is a system that is running traditional Windows as a desktop. So, yeah, you can run it out the box, but I think most serious network attached storage and server users, home labbers, or those that are just looking for a good destination backup, they're probably going to swap that out for TrueNAS or Unraid pretty darn quick. Something you can definitely do on this device, because hot swapping in this nature isn't going to be great within a Windows environment, and ultimately this just feels once again like a mini PC with NAS storage bolted on top. It does have wireless connectivity, and it has Ethernet connectivity similar to that of a NAS or a switch, but ultimately we are still talking about a mini PC with dreams and airs and graces of trying to be a NAS, and I think in some regards it succeeds, in others it doesn't. Now, if we look at the drive installed inside, I've installed an Ultrastar drive inside. Again, it does fit inside, it supports that weight, but again, not the highest quality drive plastic trays there inside. Now, as you can see, direct connection there with that baseline ventilation fan there at the base. A really nice kind of conical effect there, and a whole thing coning in, presumably directing that air even better, going directly into, if I bring that closer, that heat sink there that lives just behind the CPU fan, which we'll go into more detail on later on. The layout is surprisingly nuanced, I will say that. And again, we'll go into a little bit more detail later on, but with the Wi-Fi connectivity on this, running on a Wi-Fi 6 controller inboard, the AX200NGW M2 adapter there, running into 2 antenna on the base of this panel inside this. But for now, in terms of design, I think it's very chic looking, I'll definitely say that. And I will also add as well that in terms of desk space and occupation, this is going to be very, very small indeed. But for now, let's talk about the ports and connections on this, because if you are going to utilize it primarily as a NAS system, which is what you should be doing, let's see how you can interface with this. Now, once again, because this device is ultimately a mini PC that has the potential to be a NAS, it won't come as a huge surprise that the ports and connections are very PC-centric in many ways. So if we start with the ones at the top there, we've got ourselves some USB ports. We've got an additional USB-C there at the bottom, but there's an element of ambiguity from what I could see with the specifications about whether that can be used for power. It says power use, but for all we know that is just your standard USB-C power output, with this acting as a host to power a client device, not as a PSU. And unfortunately I do not have a sufficiently powered USB Type-C power connector to test that much more, but if I can, I'll probably insert it here in the video or put something on screen there after production. There at the top we've got a couple of USB 2 ports there, presumably for your KVM setup, your keyboard, video and mouse, again mini PC, but we've got an additional USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports here, 2 of them, each of them 10 gigabits per second connection there. Lovely stuff for our external storage media. Also, interestingly, we've got a little SD card slot there to add additional storage to this, which again, it's something we don't really see anymore in the world of NAS. I kind of miss the days when we had a big fat SD card slot on a lot of more compact desktop NAS devices, which is largely all but gone these days. And although it is a micro SD, which is less convenient, it's still nice to have it on there. But interesting, we've also got DisplayPort and HDMI output, something which is very common when it comes to a lot of these mini PCs. And indeed, when I was looking around about a month and a half ago on the process, and we did a whole guide on converting mini PCs into NAS, one, whether it was worth it and exactly how to do it, we did talk about the usability of having multiple visual outputs there for things like surveillance or for running individual VMs and doing a direct output, and also assigning them to multimedia applications too. But interestingly, the system also has two 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports now, and that is where we're moving away from a lot of these mini PCs. And again, we could talk about Topton, we could talk about CWWK and Changwang, but I like that this is rocking out the gate at that price tag with 2 times 2.5 GBE network connectivity. Again, potentially an external output of 550 megabytes per second, give or take. That also means that these 2 ports here, in conjunction with the right NAS OS, with the right software support, could also take advantage of additional USB connected Ethernet adapters for 2.5G and 5GBE. And again, this 5G to USB adapter from QNAP I've used on multiple different operating systems, pretty much to universal success. So again, I can see a lot of NAS OSs allowing you to take advantage of that overall. The port and connections on this, again, I could talk about audio in and out there, but again, that's one we're erring more towards that mini PC territory. I will say, as a NAS, if I put my NAS goggles on, and again, compared this to those 2 other 2-bay NAS devices, because that's what we're kind of doing here, I will say that those ports and connections, they stand up. They do, they stand up. They definitely stand up in comparison to the Synology. With the QNAP, slightly less advantageous because there is a lack of any kind of PCI upgradability on this device. But still nonetheless, 2.5G, 2.5G, HDMI 4K 60 frames, HDMI 4K 60 frames, USB 10G, USB 10G. There's a lot to like here. But, as my mother always said to me, it's what's on the inside that matters. Taking this device apart was weirdly easy. I'll be straight with you. 4 screws on the base panel of this allowed me to remove the entire top part of this just by removing the 4 screws that were keeping that base panel in place there. Now, there is our 90mm fan there on the base, standard PC fan there, which I'm sure you could swap out with something quieter, but again, until we get this device booted up, we're going to hold off judgment on that. Then, of course, we have got ourselves the CPU fan there. It's a nice low-scale laptop style fan, but I will say it's quite a chunky little fan there. You can see the depth of that fan there on the side, and that feeds directly into a large-scale heatsink there. Now, I really like that. Whenever you're looking at a lot of these mini PCs that are rocking out from the East incredibly affordably with sometimes very attractive specs, you know, alternative to Intel, NUC and more, I will say heating has become incredibly important on those mini PCs, because obviously these are single board machines. Case in point, here we have that Changwang board there that we're utilising in the AIOT6, and inside there, that CPU has got a whole board-sized heatsink there on board with the fan built in. The other side was just made up by the traditional storage and the memory and the ports and connections. But this birth of mini PCs that we're seeing entering more and more into the field of desktop PC use and, of course, micro NAS development, we're seeing a lot more interesting ways in which heat dissipation is being managed on these small scale devices, and a lot of NAS brands, as good as their product is, and I will stand by them, I still think they're great, I will say that the changes in the chassis design and the board design haven't been vast in the last 5 to 10 years. They've been small as they've, had to deal with, hotter running processors and more powerful processors, but with an erring toward efficiency, they have definitely relied on pre-existing model designs internally, whereas a lot of these mini PCs have really been banging out some fantastic power and temperature efficiency measures internally. Now, the CPU inside is the Intel N100. The N100 was the latest generation of Intel Alder Lake processors there since they started dropping the Pentium and Celeron families there. When they got rid of those and merged them into this new kind of hybrid middle family CPU between them, I think a lot of users had reservations, but it has to be said the M100 has been absolutely kicking bottom. What do I mean by that? Well, rocking out the gate with a 1 gigahertz baseline power that can be clocked up to quite an impressive 3.4 gigahertz and integrated graphics on board. It's finding a great line for that power efficiency in 24/7 deployment there. And I will also add, alongside that CPU and its power efficiency there, it has got, but it's a Gen 3 processor, quite a lot of range in terms of what it's going to be capable of. You're going to see that CPU appearing, or the 102, a lot more in 2024 and 2025 when we see the next refresh towards the end of the year of a lot of existing turnkey NAS solutions in the market there. That CPU and its integrated graphics, of course, isn't really going to rival an Intel Core. It's not really going to rival kind of a file handling monster like some of those embedded Ryzens, which are very eye on the prize when it comes to file transit. But I will say, for middle ground home small business deployment, that's going to be a good CPU that's got a lovely amount of performance range added to it, and flexible power efficiency at BIOS level, allowed to flick between just how much power utilization and how much power in the old Lecky stakes that you want to be using up there internally. Also, the system arrives with two SODIMM memory slots there on board. Again, this is the 16 gig model, and that is a DDR4 3200 non-ECC memory module inside there, but it's an extra slot just waiting to be propped up there with another one, and with support up to 32 gig internally there. On top of that, as you can also see inside, we've got an M2 NVMe there. We're still not sure on the architecture in there, and I would say, given potential temperature concerns and indeed the number of lanes afforded to this device, it would not surprise me if those are Gen 3x1 or Gen 3x2, something that is either confirmed already on the specs on screen or something I'll find out later on or in the written review below. On top of that, we've also got, as mentioned earlier on, the Wi-Fi card there, that little M2 Wi-Fi card there, that's being fed into two individual antennae just there on the base. Overall, that low profile CPU is a match made in heaven for such a small scale device, and they haven't really worried too much about heat dissipation and heat sinking, because generally when I first heard about Aoostar sending this device to us here, and again they sent the device, we get to say what the hell we want though, when they sent it, I will say my biggest concern about this device was always going to be heat, with those two drives sandwiching the Mobo inside there, and this being heavily reliant on vertical cooling throughout it. But now I've got my hands on the device, I am less concerned, but we won't know for certain until we boot this device up and just see how this system arrives to us in terms of software. Now, as I mentioned earlier on in this video, there isn't much point reviewing the software in of itself on this device. It arrives with Windows 11. You didn't come to this video to watch a review for Windows 11. You could just go to that notification at the bottom of your screen where you've been offered a free upgrade. Man alive, we're all sick of that. But what I thought was interesting to see was noise levels of this device, because as I mentioned, with that profile and the fan at the base and in the middle, I really want to know about how much noise this thing's going to make when in operation. Now, one of the best ways to see that is, of course, to turn it on and see what we see at boot, because generally those fans will go on their highest at that point. Now, what I've done is remove the storage drives inside. I want to get the baseline noise of this system, because whatever drives we put inside, be they mechanical enterprise, be they large capacity, be they 2.5-inch SSD, they are going to reflect the overall noise as well. So for now, until I put them inside, I've removed our two drives, and these are two 8TB WD-Red Pro drives, so noisier drives than your average bear. Out from the system. I'll pop those back in a bit. And what we're going to do is do two things. One, we're going to boot this device up, and two, we want to see what happens when we do. What are we presented with? Is it a pre-config unit, or does it go straight into a Windows 11 install? So I'm going to be silent now for about 15 seconds and let it do its thing. So, not exactly a vast amount of noise. We've only got about a foot of difference between the microphone and the device. If we lift it up, we definitely know that fan is on. But it's definitely doing a good job of disguising that noise there. Obviously, there's the CPU fan in there as well. So if we remove that out and bring that in, I think it's doing a pretty good job of disguising a lot of that noise there in the background. Now, what about, and we're not going to go through the Windows installation here, because we'll have to do all the login nonsense and all of that, but what we'll do is we'll power this device off in the least safe way possible. Don't do that at home. And now we're going to introduce our drive media there. So let's go ahead, make sure we get them in the right slots, put those inside, and now we're going to do exactly the same thing, but this time with our 3.5-inch mechanical storage media inside. And have a little look how that noise compares there. So let's go in, doing the noise in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So straight away, we can definitely hear those drives spinning up. You've heard that Pro Series drive there in the background, but it has definitely gravitated the noise just a little bit over what we saw before. This is by no means a scientific test, but certainly this isn't able to disguise a lot of that hard drive noise from larger than 8TB drives or those Pro Series drives as well. But moving aside from that, I do think it's worth highlighting that that Windows 11 software that you can see there on screen, I mean, ultimately, yeah, you could use this as a mini PC. I wouldn't. If you go ahead and use Unraid on a USB stick, stick that inside, bang, you're laughing. Go ahead, flash that SSD or remove the SSD and replace it with another one with true NAS ready to go, then you're laughing. You'd even go with the bootloader on USB with something like Rufus. Now, on top of that, it's worth touching on, as mentioned earlier on, the Wi-Fi connectivity of this device. Because as mentioned, the base of this system includes those two additional Wi-Fi antenna there. Now, within the context of the mini PC, that is kind of host managed there. It's the Wi-Fi. It is going to be interacting with a third-party Wi-Fi there. But what's interesting is if you were to go ahead and install something like Proxmox on this, utilize this as a hotspot, use Proxmox and run your NAS OS side by side with OpenWRT, pfSense, stuff like that. There isn't a lot of physical network connectivity, but that does open the door to not only junking that Windows 11 license on this, but also taking advantage of those third-party OSs. I don't think anyone is going to be utilizing this device with that Windows 11 software as a NAS. They're simply not. One, because it costs more than buying a mini PC with the same hardware, and two, because you wouldn't really be able to take advantage of the storage capabilities in a 24/7 network environment and remote access environment anywhere near as well as you could with using that third-party NAS OS software. And when you do, depending on the software you choose to use, the capabilities and the means with which you can take advantage of those network controllers, Unraid being a prime example of it not being straightforward, is going to differ user case to user case. So again, Given that this has got that Wi-Fi connectivity, and given that I would argue the majority of users are not going to be taking advantage of the Windows environment, therefore benchmarking this in a Windows spec is kind of not hugely useful in this context. I would say that because of that Wi-Fi connectivity, I would recommend for most users considering this to go down that Proxmox route, or utilise a NAS software that's allow you to run a container, or at least a NAS software hosted hypervisor there for that VM to take advantage of the wireless connectivity there, because natively most NAS software isn't really going to be able to harness that in any meaningful way. But apart from that, let's make our way back to the setup there and talk about what we've learned, whether we like this, and future plans for this device. What do I think? Well, I'll say right now, I think I'm more excited about what this device represents than the device itself. Now, what do I mean by that? I don't mean I think this is a bad product. I really don't. I think for what you are getting, for between 209 Nika to about 349 Nika, depending on the configuration you go for a 2-bay NAS and this kind of hardware, that is really, really good value. On top of that, the fact that it is open source software ready for you to rock whichever one you want to go with, and not have to get the silicon paste under your fingernails, that is a good sign to me. And just another sign in terms of this product and products like it disrupting the pre-existing NAS market between open source DIY and complete turnkey. And that's why I'm more excited about the idea of it and what this represents than the product itself, because that means that these brands are going to have to meet this challenge. Now that users know that there isn't just 2 shows in town, now there is this growing third one. Returning back to this product though, I'll say that for their first real NAS solution from this brand, this is a very confident move. Notwithstanding that this is clearly the entry-level product as the N100, there is the R7 with that much better and competitive CPU included, and we're already hearing about new Pro Series 4-bay and of course that NVMe level system we talked about in the channel already, which is really starting to pick up pace in terms of development from what I understand, and also one that I really hope we get to talk about next year. And with this device arriving out the gate with 2.5 GBE, we're rocking out the gate with USB 10G, rocking out the gate with storage capabilities, and I would argue very proficient cooling systems for a budget 2-bay, something where until the last 12 months or so we saw a lot of the lesser known brands kind of fall over themselves. But is it perfect? No. I'm not overly keen on the ambiguity around the software. Yes, it arrived with Windows 11 on board, and yes, you can go ahead and throw on your third-party OS of choice, but they don't really go into too much detail about that Windows 11 software on board, and if anything, they've kind of thrown that on there in a kind of, we got to put something on there attitude feeling there in the background. On top of that, the fact that I'm kind of locked in at 2.5 GBE on most cases at this price point I wouldn't complain about, but I think there's going to be a lot of long-term storage buyers that are going to look at a device like this and find that 2 times 2.5 GBE and no ability to scale up is going to be somewhat limiting down the road. Also, I don't want to get all moany about this, but I wish devices like this were starting to roll out the gate more and more with USB power, and we are seeing more proficient and more powerful USB Type-C power supplies rocking out the gate, and I'm surprised that this is arriving at the tail end of 2023 without that included. But again, for this price tag and for its expectations of what you're getting for your money, I think it is a very, very confident move by Aoostar. I had a bloody good go at pronouncing it that time. In terms of their NAS development, and as we go into 2023 with brands like Ugreen, the Storaxa, which is still there on the fence in the background, then we've got the Zimmer Cube as well. We're seeing this big middle ground, and I think in all of that that's going on, Aoostar are set to make some very big waves in terms of their NAS production, and if this is the first of many that I review, this has left me impressed overall. But thank you so much for watching. There's a written review in the description. We might do a quick before you buy on this as well, alongside some Plex media server testing and maybe some installation guides for this. If that's what you guys are interested in, let me know. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this, click like and subscribe, the usual YouTube guff. But on top of that, if you need further support and advice, support and device, if you need further support and advice, then do head into the description where there are links to the NAScompares free advice section. It's the blue button on the side of every single page. On top of that, you can take advantage of the membership programs where you get expedited support, or get access to our monthly Zoom consultations and exclusive content, or you can hire me via Zoom consultation on the Ko-Fi pages linked in the description. And finally, if you want to learn more about this device, if you want to see more videos on this, just let me know in the description. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching and have yourselves a fantastic week.